Hello everyone, I'm James. Today I'm going to be implementing a language server for a new project that I've been working on. Some of you might know already, but I'm working on a markup language for GTK UI files. Something that's kind of annoyed me for a long time is writing all of that XML to define a user interface. So I'm working on a markup language that will compile into the XML, but it should be hopefully a lot easier to write. And part of making it easier to write is going to be having a language server. So the language server protocol is a standard created by Microsoft originally for VS Code, but it's a standard, so any IDE can implement it, and Builder has a client. And basically, it provides all of the language integration that we've come to expect from modern IDEs. So things like the documentation on hover, diagnostics, like error messages in the editor, semantic highlighting, where keywords are highlighted based on what they are and not just based on the syntax. So like an enum member might be highlighted differently from a variable, even if syntactically they're the same thing. So things like that. Completion is another one, another big one. So all of those things are handled by language servers. And the benefit of a language server is if you've got we've got a whole bunch of different IDEs out there, and there's a whole bunch of different languages. And we don't want every editor to need its own implementation of all these features for every language. That would just be too much. So instead, languages have language servers, and editors know how to interact with language servers. And that way, we can have one implementation of all the features for every editor. So for example, when I'm done with this language server, someone could create an extension for VS Code pretty easily. So that's a basic overview of what the language server protocol does. So today I'm going to be implementing one for my new language. So my program is written in Python. Basically, it's just a compiler that's going to take my language and convert it into XML. So I've got a parser, and this is already done. I've got like a tokenizer and a parser and all of that kind of stuff, and it can generate the XML. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a command, and I've gotten started a little bit. I needed to make sure that all the communication between Builder and my tool was working so I can do the fun stuff on the stream. So I've got this command. So you'll basically run GTK blueprint tool LSP, or you won't, the IDE will. And it doesn't do anything because it's waiting for the IDE to send it commands. And the format is JSON RPC. So it's a remote procedure call format based on JSON, which is very handy because Python has a built-in JSON module. We won't need to add any dependencies for this. I suppose I could find a JSON RPC library, but it's easy enough to implement that I'm not going to pull in a dependency for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new module to store all this stuff in. Actually, for now, I'll just make a new file called lsp. And I can spell right. And so we're going to create a class called language server. And this is going to be the main class for our language server. And then in here, so let's define a function called run that will run the language server. And I'll take all of this stuff that I've got in my main file right now, and we're going to copy it over there. And then right here, we're just going to we're going to create a new language server. Import that. Alright, so it should work the same way as before, but now with a separate file for all of this stuff for organization. Now, I go to my to-do list. So I've done this, that's my base class, but I need to set up some stuff to do. So right now this is just a static response to test stuff. We need it to actually test. No, or we need to actually respond with real data instead of just this test response that I was using to make sure stuff was working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a feature of Python called decorators. Now, decorators are really cool. What I can do is I can define a function here. I'm going to call it command. And then, right now it's just going to return its argument. Then I'm going to, and we'll see what the first one is. So the first command I need to implement is initialize. I'm going to go ahead and define a function called initialize. And the decorator syntax is do at command. Do I plan to stream some more? Probably. I'm not sure if it'll always be Wednesdays. I'll have to decide on that. I might switch it up a bit in case people have different schedules. So this is the decorator syntax, and it's actually pretty simple. What it's going to do is it's going to take this function, and it's going to pass the function as an argument to this function. Now, right now, it just returns it, but I can do some stuff with it. So I could do func dot, whatever. So functions are objects in Python, which means that they can have fields or properties, whatever you call them. Like they can have this metadata attached to them, which can be really useful. But we're not even, with the decorators, we're not actually restricted to, like, we could return an entirely different function here if we wanted. Another thing we can do, this is getting into quite a bit of metaprogramming, but we can have this return a function. We can have this return a decorator function instead of just being a decorator function. And that's actually what I'm going to do. So this command function is actually going to take one argument, and that is call it JSON method. What it's going to do is I'm going to define a new function called decorator and return it. And this is the real decorator. This is the real decorator. And then what I can do is I can do initialize here, and in the decorator, okay. So it's a bit complicated, but it ends up giving us some really neat syntax for being able to declare metadata on our functions. So basically all this is doing is this is creating a decorator function that's going to take this initialize function and set its JSON method property. And then later, so down here, we're going to have a loop. And so this is just going to list all the functions in the class language server and print all of their names. I hope that works. Nope, it doesn't. Okay. Let's see what's going on. All right, so it's not just functions, it's everything, including all of these built-in things. Let's see how to do this. A bit of light Googling. That should list all of the oh, well, that would be a problem. Let's so dir actually returns the names, not the items, it seems. So let's do we can get that name, this item. So this should print all of the functions that all of the functions in the work. Let's see. Try just this. Okay, so yeah, it is returning all of the functions, including the built-in ones. Ah, that would be the problem. So the decorator function is not, it's returning none, which means the function doesn't actually get added. All right, there we go. So we got it to work. So basically, this is going through all the things in language server. And it's checking whether it's a callable, so whether it's a function, basically, and whether it has this JSON method attribute that we put on it through the decorator. And right now it just prints it out. But what we're going to do is going to have a dictionary here of commands. So this is a sort of a static attribute of the class. So it's an attribute of the class itself, not of instances of the class, which is what we want. We're going to do language server dot commands do. And now that we have that, if we print out the commands, we should get that list. And there we go. We've got a dictionary of this to this. If we add another command, so that's might seem like a lot of boilerplate, but the benefit that adding another command is as easy as this. And if we run it again, oh, well, that would be a problem. So it seems like it has removed the other one. All right, more debugging. The all-time favorite, just adding print statements. Oh, okay, so here's a hint. It did open, but it's giving us the initialize. So it's there. Oh, yeah. It's always the tiny little copy-paste errors, isn't it? So there we go. We've got our did open and our initialize. So if you don't make a copy-paste error, it's as easy as just adding that to add a new command. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that for now. What we're going to do now is we need to implement the system that actually runs all of these commands. So the way that the communication works is the client, which is your IDE, so Builder, is going to send commands to the language server, and the server is going to respond. Now, there are some cases where the server can send a notification without receiving a request first, but I don't think that we're going to do any of that just now. So the IDE is going to send notifications of when a file changes that the language server wants to know about. So, for example, the diagnostics, when we're going to receive this text document did open or did change notification, and then we'll recompile the document and send back any diagnostics. But first we need this initialize method. So if I go to the language server specification, there's this initialize command. And it's sent as the first request from the client to the server. And basically it just tells the language server what the client is capable of, so that we don't try to send, so we can avoid sending notifications, avoid processing, not like going to the work of processing stuff that the client won't understand anyway. So for now, we're just going to store all that stuff. So we'll do set client capabilities to be an empty dictionary, and our initialize. So we need to take some parameters. If we look at the documentation here, the parameters for it, it's got a process ID. We can ignore that, probably ignore that. Really, we're going to ignore everything except this capabilities. And we'll just store those. I don't think we're going to use them yet, but we'll keep track of them. Now I want to have a command, or not a command, but a function to send a response. So we'll start with send, that just sends any JSON. It's going to do this. So this is the format that we're using for the JSON RPC. We have a content length, and then an optional content type, then 2 new lines, and then the data, which is JSON encoded. Now to send a response, and also every message back and forth, we need the JSON RPC field to be exactly 2.0. For this, we're going to set the result. I believe that's it. And this will handle setting the JSON RPC field. So if we send a response, it's going to send our capabilities and the ID of the request that we're responding to. So this initialize function will take the ID of the request and the parameters for the request. It'll process the request, and then when it sends it back, it has to send a response to the same. It has to include the ID of the request that it's responding to, because language servers are allowed to do things asynchronously. And in that case, it's not always just send a request and get an immediate response. So we have our methods to send responses. Now we need to process commands. What this stuff does is it's just a loop that's going to read the format of JSON RPC with all the headers and everything. And the code is pretty messy, but should work for now, hopefully. What we're going to do is we're going to read this JSON line. And so we'll load the text that we receive, and they're just communicating over standard in and standard out. So when Builder when Builder runs the language server, it'll hook up it'll send input to it and read output from it. That's pretty simple, just reading standard in. So we need to decode the JSON, and then we're going to look at what method it is. So here we're getting the method from the JSON, we're getting the ID, and we need to get the params. Then if we're able to respond to that command, we will call it. And if we don't have a method for that command, then we'll just ignore it. Now for this command, the response that we're sending is our own capabilities. Let me make this a bit to read. So here we're just saying that we are able to, we're saying that we want to hear about we want to have text documents synchronized, and we want to hear about when they're opened and closed and when they're changed. Now this number is the change type. We can get them, so we can have text synchronized with just the changes. So it'll send us ranges, like which range that changed and what it changed to, which I'll do later for performance reasons, but for now, we're going to set it to 1, which is going to have it send the entire document each time it changes, just for simplicity for now. So, hopefully, we have a working language server, a very simple language server that does nothing. I'm not going to test it yet, because really there's not much of a way to see whether it's working, because it's not doing anything. It's just responding to the initialize call. So, the rest of what I want to do today is to get diagnostics to work. And for that, we're going to need these 3. We're going to need to be able to respond to these 2 commands by sending this person off. Or we're going to need to send these 2. We need to respond to these 2 commands, and we need to be able to send this notification. Now, a notification is basically a request that doesn't have an ID. In JSON RPC, that's really all it is. So basically, we're just notifying the client that we're publishing some diagnostics, but we're not expecting a response, so we don't send a request ID. So did open and did change are the commands that will tell us when the editor opens a document that's one of the file types that we're interested in, that our language server is registered for. Did change is when the document changes, and publish diagnostics is something we'll send to the client to tell it that we have diagnostics for a file. So let's look at the documentation for did open. Here it is, did open, and it has a field called text document that contains a text document item. Let's go ahead and make our new command. So text document. So we don't really, let's see, do we need, yeah, so we're gonna need the URI. Because we need to send it in our, so we're not actually going to read from the URI, but it's the identifier that we'll be using when we send the published diagnostics. And then we need, so the language ID is always going to be the same, so we probably don't need it. I don't think we need the version number either, since it's not a threaded application. It's just going to immediately send diagnostics back. Actually, we might want it. Then the text of the document. Now I'm going to create a new function called So what this is going to do is so now I'll just do it right here instead of making a new function. So we're going to parse, basically compile the text, but instead of compiling it to XML, We're just going to get far enough to see if there's any errors. Now I have code for that here that I'm just going to paste. Then we need to import all this stuff, so we need tokenizer and parser. We don't need to generate the XML. We do need to wrap this in a try except, because the way that it reports errors is by throwing exceptions. It's just the way that I decided to build it. And Printable Error is a class that I made for basically compilation errors. Actually, no, we want compile error. Wait, do it? Never mind, yeah, we want printable error. So there's compile error for one compilation error that has like a range of text that it's for. And then I have an error called multiple errors for when multiple errors arise. If we go back to our language server stuff, we need to import that. So what we're going to do is actually, so we're going to first take multiple errors. So if there's multiple errors, we need to send all of them. And if there's not multiple errors, I need to import the printable error. Yeah, I did. Yeah, so the let's see. We go down to the diagnostics. So the notification just contains the URI, the version number of the document. So yeah, we do need to save that. That is optional, but we'll go ahead and do it. And then an array of diagnostic information items. Let's make a function to create a diagnostic from error. Now this diagnostic contains the range, severity. It's always error right now. That's optional, and we don't really have error codes. It's just descriptions. The message tags. I don't think we use. Yeah, we won't use that. Okay. So we need text of file. What we'll do is we need the range, message. Let's go ahead and look at our errors. Okay, so this is the code. The language server protocol uses line and column numbers instead of just an index and to the string of the file. So we need to, but the internals, like the way that I've built this, it just uses a string index. So we need to convert it, and this is the code to do that. So I'm going to split it into new function. So that should do it. Now we have this extra function that we'll use. Go back to, what am I doing? Okay. On line 41. No. So someone asked, should line 41 be content length not equal to -1? No. So the all of this stuff is just to make sure that we get a content length before we try to read content. It's pretty messy code. I'll change it later, but it's going to require some messing around and debugging, and that would be boring, so I'm not going to do it on the stream. Let me go get the, so we have a range. The range consists of a start and an end, and each one of those takes a line and a character. Right, so we've got the range and the message. See what else we need in a diagnostic. So those are the range and the message are the only required things, but I guess we can do a severity of errors. So that's 1. Okay. So we have this function. What do I do next? So multiple errors. So if we have multiple errors, we need to send that, and if we have just one error, then we need to send an array of just one thing. So if we have multiple errors, it's just called errors, right? Create an array of diagnostics. The LSP was made by Microsoft, so the standard was. There's there's no Microsoft code in any of what I'm doing, but the standard that we're using was. And I believe they originally made it for Visual Studio Code, not for VS Code. Okay, so now we have our list of diagnostics. We can send a response. I'm going to send a notification. We'll need to create that method. It'll be text slash diagnostics. And this notification needs the URI, the version, and and I believe it needs to send a response to the did open, unless it's a notification. Let's see. Did open. Yeah, it's a notification, so we don't need to send a response. We're just sending a notification of our own. Let's define send notification. No ID. That's a method. And a result. Or all right, so we've got that. Now the next thing we need to, so we process did open and we send publish diagnostics. The only thing we need is did change. Now did change is almost exactly the same thing as did open. Let me just see if there's any changes we do need to yeah. Let's see. Go back up here. Check the sync kind. Change. So we've got text dot, so the version number and the content change. Not actually quite sure what this is going to look like. Let's go ahead and test what we've got. Make sure that it doesn't crash when I run it. That's always a good place to start. And then here's that would be the case. I'm going to install it. And then I'll switch over to Builder. Now I've already got it. I've already made a simple little plugin. I just copied it from the Go plugin. And it runs on the host. It runs the language server from the host. Eventually, hopefully it'll be installed in the Builder Flatpak, so it'll be easier. Let's see if it worked. First, I need to put an error in it. No, so this is, actually, let's do a syntax error, just to make sure. Oh, okay, so it should have a syntax error, or it should be cool. Let's see what's wrong. Okay. If we open it again, so it appears that it's not working, which is not really surprising. That's a lot of stuff. See if there's any warnings anywhere. Builder, that's a lot of logging. I'm not seeing any warning. And this is where it starts the language server. So yeah, that's definitely not it. Okay, so what are the files for? It's a markup language for GTK that I'm writing. So basically, instead of writing XML, you'll write this simpler markup language. It looks like this. Yeah, so it's basically a replacement for UI files, although it's not entirely a replacement. Internally it compiles to the XML, but it's just an easier way to write it. Go back to our language server, and I'm just going to, in order to test it, let's see if we can comment all this out and just do a manual. See if that. Nope. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do some debugging. And it might not happen on this stream because got about 10 minutes left. I want to keep these to about an hour. But I'll see how far I can get. I wonder if I can just write a log file. How about I do this? And whenever we get some input, do we do this. Output as well. So let's try that. Okay, remove it. Make sure. Let's see. Oh, great. Okay, so we've got input, but either logging isn't working or it's not outputting anything. And I was having problems with the logging earlier, so with it not writing all of the content, so maybe that's it. But it should be. Let's see. But if we look at the text of the log, it's got a method initialize, which we've defined. Then it'll get that method and call it with plus maybe we need to do that. Try that. Right, so that didn't work. The other thing I'm going to do is wrap all this in accept. So if it's crashing, we want to be able to see that. Imagine that's probably what's going on. Okay, oh, yep, that would be the problem. Name JSON is not defined, so our server is crashing. Let's import JSON. It's amazing how much easier it is when you actually read your debugging output. Crazy how that works. Okay. So we're getting our did open message. And we're outputting a publish diagnostics. But maybe there's a problem with that. Let's check. Text document / publish diagnostics. That's correct. Under params, it's got the URI and the version. Then it's got the diagnostics, which is an array, and each item has a range, a message. So that's correct. And then the message is a string, and the range has a start and an end, each with a line and a character. Yep. Okay, so that all looks correct. I'm not sure why Builder isn't showing the diagnostics. Also, it's kind of interesting. We're getting another request from Builder that we don't actually know how to handle. It's asking us for a list of all the symbols in the document that it can put right here. But our language server doesn't respond to that request, so it's empty. Oh. So I'll have to spend some time debugging it. Me staring blankly at my screen, I'm sure, is not very interesting. So I think I'm going to end the stream here. But I did get quite a bit done. I got the language server started, and we at least know that it's from this output that it's connecting, and it's working to an extent. So yeah, it's a pretty fun project to be working on. I think it's going to be really cool and make app development for GNOME and other GTK environments a lot easier. So yeah, I think I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you all for watching. And of course, I think the end of the stream is where I do my shameless plug for my GitHub sponsors profile. So you can always sponsor all of this work that I do there. But either way, I appreciate everyone listening in, and I will hopefully be back with, I'm not quite sure what yet, but hopefully I'll be doing this again. So